Well, good morning, everybody. We have officially entered week 1 of the Hawkeye football season. And I know we've got some of the guys here with us today, and I'm not going to put you on the spot. But if I were to ask you if you're ready for the first game next Saturday, I think everybody in here would say, we hope you would say yes. And if I asked you why you're saying yes, you're ready, you would say, well, because we put in all the time in the off season, all the training, lifting, all of the effort that you had to go through. And I would guess quite a bit of that probably wasn't all that pleasant. But it got you ready. And we all know this. The servers before Mass were talking about how excited they are to go back to school tomorrow. With classes starting tomorrow, whether you're in college or you're in high school, whatever, the semester is not always going to be easy and comfortable. But neither is it supposed to be. Because if you're not pushing yourself, you're not growing. But if you know what the goal is that you're aiming at, you can put yourself even through the toughest of training. Now, we often don't think about it this way, but the same principle holds true when it comes to our faith. From our second reading today, at the time, the discipline of God seems not a cause for joy, but for pain. But with time comes the peaceful fruit of righteousness. Just as a flower does not grow unless certain conditions are met, so our faith does not magically grow unless certain things are done. And while it is true that God is as near to us whether we are doing all the right things or are not doing the right things, our ability to fully know God is in part dependent upon the effort that we put into it. And this is what Jesus is ultimately trying to teach in our gospel this morning. We've been in a section of the Gospel of Luke that, to be frank, these last few weeks has been pretty tough. It's been all about the end of all things. And this morning, Jesus is asked a question about the end of things. Jesus, will only a few people be saved? Now, in the historical context of this question, the inquirer was wondering, hey, Jesus, how many of us Jews are you going to be able to save from Roman rule? But in his answer, Jesus expands that question. The question that is on many of our minds, and even the minds of Jesus' original listeners, was, Jesus, at the end of time, how many of us are going to be able to enjoy life lived fully with God? Does Jesus answer that question? No. Imagine if he had. To the question, hey, Jesus, will only a few people be saved? What if he had said, hey, 90% of you are going to be saved? Well, we would just go on and not really care all that much about following the ways of God or really practicing any part of the faith. We'd say, I'm good. I don't need to worry about any of that. But what if he had said, hey, 10% of you are going to be saved? We would be a nervous wreck. And we would become very scrupulous and very anxious about our salvation. But Jesus does not answer that question. When asked the question about an outcome, Jesus tells us to focus on the effort. The Lord does not want us to be worried or focused on the outcome. He wants us to worry about the effort. This curious question, Jesus changes into a personal challenge. Personal challenge. We simply do not know how many people will be saved, but we are to work as though that number can always change by one. And so Jesus today tells us to strive, to walk through the narrow gate. Now, what is that? To strive, to fight for walking through the narrow gate. That is the process by which you are becoming a saint. That is the process of the effort, the discipline, and the training by which you are becoming the person that God has in mind for you. And it takes a lot of work. To be on the narrow way means to be very intentional about protecting that most important relationship in our life, our relationship with God. It means to guard that relationship while we live in a culture that frankly is not made to guard that relationship for you. It means to think about, when we make decisions, how will this impact my relationship with the Lord? I share this story because it's true and not because it's normative. This is not a general rule for everybody, but this was an example of one person that I know very well who had to make a decision to stay on the narrow way. This man, he was offered a promotion at work. And this promotion was going to offer him quite a bit more money for his family. Now, his family was by no means starving. But this new job was going to require him to come in 2 hours earlier each day so that he could be there when the New York Stock Exchange opened. Well, at this point in this man's life, he had gotten into the habit of going to daily morning mass. And this was the way in which he stayed on the narrow way. But if he was to take the job, it was going to prevent him from doing that. Now, daily mass is not at all a requirement. It's above and beyond, and it's by no means something most of us can even do or maybe even would want to do. But for this man, the narrow way he was on, he deemed it essential. And he didn't take that job. And when I heard this, I thought he was nuts. But the call of the disciples to be disciples of Christ is as real and as costly today as it has ever been. To be on the narrow way means to often see things in a different sort of way, to allow our worldview to be shaped by Christ, to have a third way of seeing things when so often the world only gives us two ways of seeing things. That's to be on the narrow way. To be on the narrow way means to be very conscious of how I spend my time and how I spend my money. But to be on the narrow way is not about just deferred gratification. To be on the narrow way, it does not just mean, hey, I'm going to rough it now and then one day it's all going to pay off. No. To be a Christian is not to have a pre-punched ticket to heaven and then to be miserable the entire way there. No. To be on the narrow way, to live the Christian life, is to live a life so full of meaning that you would actually want to live it forever. And to do this is not easy. To do this is to set ourselves on a path where we will fall, and there will be times when we fail. But if we don't fail, we're not aiming high enough. And the thing that is the most true is that God is with us the entire way. I just want to end with this. In our gospel this morning, Jesus used those words, wailing and grinding of teeth. Those are tough words. He uses them not because he wants anyone to ever experience that. He uses them because he does not want anyone to experience that. But I just want to remind us that the same person this morning who reminds us that he will never force us to have a relationship with him, is also the same one who described himself as the kind of shepherd who leaves the 99 in search of the one lost sheep. Which means two things. You and I are more loved than we could ever imagine by a good God who wants nothing but good things for us. And it will be the fight of our lives to remember that. But friends, God's commitment to us always outpaces our commitment to him. And this is good news for you and for me as we seek to walk down the narrow way.